Welcome to Transcendent. I'm Raya and I'm the daughter.
And I'm Joe, and I'm the dad.
Hey, Dad, I had a really great experience at my dentist here the other day.
At your dentist,
The dentist said, open up. And I said, well, I've been feeling a little sad recently.
well, clearly he knew the drill.
Yeah, he did. Today, we are talking about the history of cross-dressing laws. We're going to be drawing on a very popular book, a history book written by Susan Stryker called Transgender History. We're going to be looking specifically at the cross-dressing portion of it and how that was legislated really as a way to criminalize transgender people and gender nonconforming people and just a way to really hurt people that didn't line up.
Just to be clear, you're saying that there were transgender people in the 1600s?
Well, I think there have always been transgender people as long as there have been people. Although, of course, it's a little bit anachronistic to call them transgender because in different cultures, the way that gender nonconformity will manifest itself will come out differently. And so in some cultures, it's celebrated, and in some cultures, you have to keep it hidden. And so I think in our culture right now, we would generally say that the folks that were secretly presenting as a gender other than their own, which typically means people that were assigned male at birth presenting female, or people that were assigned female at birth presenting male. Those are really the people that we're talking about. While they would not have known the term transgender or even transsexual at that time, they certainly knew what they were about.
Cross dressing laws didn't appear in a vacuum, right? They surged in the mid 1800s. While most have been struck down, the policing of gendered clothing continues today through bathroom bills.
So, a few of the key terms we want to be talking about here. One big thing, and this was new to me as we were researching this, sumptuary laws. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Does that look right to you? Sumptuary laws?
I think it does.
Yeah. So these are older laws regulating consumption or dress. So these are usually class-based. There's also some statutes that they call disguise statutes. So these are colonial predecessors to the cross-dressing laws that we have right now. So there were laws on the books of, well, if you remember your history, like at the Boston Tea Party, they dressed up as American Indians and then they pretended like they were the ones that were throwing things off, but really it was just people in the colony. So
Yeah.
they said you cannot impersonate other people. And so they also had laws on the book that it was not okay for Black people to be impersonating white people. And at that time, you could tell it was pretty racist because it did not go the other way, which is where we get blackface from. Now we have figured out how wrong that is. But there were a lot of these disguised statutes that were on the book.
Then there's trans misogyny. That's the intersection of transphobia and misogyny, specifically punishing feminine expression in those assigned male at birth.
And
Notice they
so,
didn't say punishing women.
well, right. Misogyny is just the hatred of women. It's anything that is used to make it so that men are better and women are worse. And so
Which was the
misogyny,
cultural norm at that
I,
time.
I mean, many would argue that it still seeps in right now and is the cultural norm in lots of places in all kinds of ways, although thankfully it has gotten a lot better here now. But
Yes.
there are still people that will refuse to vote for somebody that is a woman because they feel like only men should be in charge. Or
Wow.
there is still discrimination against women in business and discrimination against women in all kinds of things. So,
Oh, in some countries, especially, it's much stronger.
absolutely. And then when you take being transgender and then mix that together with that, the idea that a man would want to become a woman, oh, that's terrible. And what we mostly see then back in the 1600s are these disguise laws that we talked about. When people get angry about transgender people, who do they usually have in mind? They usually have transgender women like me in mind. They imagine a big burly man putting on a dress and saying, "Look at me, look at how feminine I am."
Yeah,
And
right.
they think of the worst case scenario. This comes from Julia Serrano in her book, The Whipping Girl. She's noticing how much she feels like people are coming against her, not just for being transgender, but specifically for leaving her male privilege behind. They can't understand why someone would do that unless they were trying to seduce men or get some of the other benefits that are perceived to be of womanhood. They have a hard time understanding why anyone would willingly choose to be feminine, since in our culture, being feminine is considered kind of lower on the ranks.
So let's talk a little bit about the origins.
Well, the big one comes from Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 5. But I'm going to read it in the King James Version, since this is likely what they would have been using at that time. The woman shall not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do so are an abomination unto the Lord thy God. So were the ancestors of cross-dressing laws. They were not the same thing, but they were basically saying you can't conceal your identity. You cannot conceal your social rank. You need to make sure that everybody understands who you are. And if you're wearing a costume from somebody that's not the real you in a way that we deem is not okay, then we can sic the authorities on you. That's kind of the idea with those.
Well, let's take a look at some of the anti cross dressing ordinances from the 1850s and up into the 1900s.
And this is where we really start to see all of this coming down. Because as you mentioned, this is the time where we're starting to see industrialization. Factories are starting to come in. People are starting to move to the cities. And so there's a lot more people that they're not in their more traditional places. So you're starting to see the rise of gay culture at this time, because now you've got cities, you've got some single men that are out by themselves. They're not living with their families anymore like it was done in the past. You've got this whole different kind of society. And then imagine in that place, then you've also got transgender people, people like me that say, I don't want to live how I was before. This feels miserable. So then you start to see the rise beginning in 1948 of all of these different cities passing official laws against someone appearing, quote, in a dress not belonging to his or her sex.
I just want to point out that's 1848, not 1948.
Right, that is 1848.
Well,
And
one of the toughest ones was the one in San Francisco in 1863. There was a fine of up to $500 for appearing in public in clothing not belonging to your sex. $500 in 1863. That you could retire on that.
oh, I'm sure.
That was a lot of
That would
money.
be a huge amount of money for sure. And you see this going through the whole country. So, for instance, the first one that we have on the books is in Columbus, Ohio in 1848, and then in Chicago in 1851, and then Wilmington, Delaware, Springfield, Illinois, Newark, New Jersey, Charleston, South Carolina through the 1850s. Then we get into the 60s. You've got Kansas City, you've got Houston, Texas, you've got Toledo, Ohio. Memphis, Tennessee, San Francisco, California, the one that you just mentioned. We get into St. Louis by 1864, Minneapolis in 1877, Oakland, California, 1878, Dallas, Texas, Nashville, San Jose, Tucson, Arizona. We've got Columbia, Missouri, Peoria, Illinois, Butte, Montana, Denver, Colorado, Lincoln, Nebraska, Santa Barbara, California, Omaha, Nebraska, and then we're getting into the 1900s. Oh, no, sorry. Then we're getting into the 1890s. Cheyenne, Wyoming, Cicero, Illinois, Cedar Falls, Iowa, and the list goes on and on and on. You've got more and more cities that keep adding these laws on the books until you can see some people were feeling like this is a really, really big deal.
That was at a time when the cities really had much, much more power. And it didn't come from the federal government. And it often didn't come from the state government, but each of the cities on their own would make these laws for their particular cities.
You said earlier, you gave us some of those reasons there. Well, let's dig into these reasons and how these really worked. Why did this all come about the 1850s? And as we were doing our research for this, so I went back and read this relevant part on from Susan Stryker in her history book. She said it's not really very clear exactly, but we've got these three things that historians are saying we think that this is probably why. Urbanization and anonymity. So you've got this shift from people living in rural areas and moving into the city. So strangers are living together now, and people are realizing you can really live the life that you wanted to live. These kinds of family ties that were keeping people shamed into not being who they really are. All of a sudden, you had some places where you could be more free, be yourself. You couldn't rely on community knowledge to identify people anymore. And so these laws were stepping in to regulate identity where relationships used to stand in place of that. So it used to be that if you're in a small town like I'm in right now, everybody knew you, everybody knew your mom and dad. If you got out of line, somebody very quickly that probably used to babysit for you would come out and say, this is not who they claim they are.
Yeah.
But as you're in cities, you don't have that same kind of structure. And so that changes up a lot.
Well, another reason that this came on so quickly was because it was this first wave of feminism, which is a really big deal. Women were pushing for advocating that it's okay for them to wear pants. Can you imagine it? Because it was still a big deal in the 1860s.
Sure.
I can remember that when I was a kid. This Amelia Bloomer and others were out there really making a big issue out of this thing. One thing I think interesting about Amelia Bloomer, if their entire family got together, you'd see the Bloomers.
That actually is where that came from. So that's why we talk about it as senior bloomers. That came from Amelia Bloomer. That said we ought to be able to wear these.
There was also anti-feminists that saw all of this as a threat and a distinction between the sexes. That was a big deal. All these anti-feminists said, wait a minute, we're going to have to do something about this. So cross-dressing laws were partly a backlash against the feminist dress reform.
Right. And first wave feminism was doing a lot of things at this time, working especially to get it so that women could vote. It wasn't
Yes,
until the 1900s. Think about it. It was people that you
1920s.
knew in your lifetime
Yes.
that were the very first generation of people that could vote. That still shocks me. I have a hard time getting my mind around that. So,
Well,
but
there are some countries today that still women cannot vote.
right. Yeah. And so this whole idea that women are equal to men at this point in first wave feminism was just looking at we just want to be legal. We just want to be able to do things legally. Next, we're going to move to immigration and race. So in California in particular, you had a big immigration of or you had a big influx of Chinese people, Chinese culture. And what a lot of white folks were saying is, well, you can't tell these men apart from the women. And part of it was because the men were oftentimes wearing these traditional long robes and also long hair. And so the Euro American settlers would say, well, they all look the same to me, kind of that standard people are different than me and therefore I don't understand them, therefore they must be bad. But especially, you can't talk about the history of transgender people and of crossing gender lines without recognizing that it is tied in a lot of ways to all of these cultural and racial things as well. So cross-dressing laws really became a tool to police and criminalize immigrant communities as well, which we see that again today, that immigrants are the ones that take the brunt of a lot of the social anger.
Let's jump to the 20th century right after this.
I'm Monica Scarbin. I love listening to the Transcendent podcasts, probably because I've been a guest speaker. I've been listening to these podcasts for over 2 years now, and have found them to be not only inspirational, but very informative and emotionally lifting to my spirits, especially when I'm not feeling very hot. I'm a supporter, and I'm glad to be a supporter. Please go to trenddescendant.com, click on support. By as little as $3 a month, you can cancel at any time.
So let's talk about the 1900s and how things changed up. We all know, if you know anything about queer history at all, about Stonewall and the Stonewall riot, and all through the 1900s leading up to the 1970s, about how there was a quiet movement of people saying, we're sick of submitting to this, until it finally broke out in the 1970s. There was a lot of police power. So there were laws that were giving police the authority to arrest anyone that they deemed as deviants, and they put that in quotes. So that would include sex workers, but that would also include drag queens, trans people, anyone that they considered gross or weird. There wasn't a whole lot of thought put into, is this just? Is it right? Is it okay? It was just a sense of, well, you're not conforming to what we think you should be, so you must be wrong.
There were other things happening around that same time. In 1966 in San Francisco, there was the Compton's Cafeteria riot. Police harassment of trans women in the Tenderloin led to uprising, frequent arrests for obstruction or cross-dressing.
Right. So that was back in the 60s. Or before that, you had the Cooper Do Not riot. Police tried to arrest drag queens for masquerading, and they put that in quotes. Patrons fought back with donuts and coffee.
That's not a do not rising, it's a donut rising because of the donuts and coffee.
It is, but why is it spelled do not?
Donut, do not. When I was in high school, one of our teachers said, donut is actually 2 words. Do not.
So then you've got other things like Virginia Prince was a trans activist, and she pleaded guilty to federal obscenity charges. Her probation explicitly forbade cross-dressing in public. But the big turning point, and we've talked about some of this before in the past, in 1962, the California Supreme Court struck down cross-dressing laws as being unconstitutionally vague. It's, how do you police that exactly? Well, is that really a women's outfit? And they recognized that it was so ambiguous, but police continued finding other laws. So they would use the intent to deceive to harass trans people. No matter what you try to do, bad actors are going to find ways to get in there. So there's always been this double standard, right? You've always got the sense that some people have recognized you can't really come down on people just for what they're wearing. How can that be wrong?
Right. But they did. Then there became where, I guess it's okay for women to wear pants. And that happened in the 60s or maybe 70s. But it took a little while. I can remember when I was younger, women could not wear pants. Even little girls, they had to wear dresses to school.
Now, though, we're really moving beyond all of this. So we don't really have any laws on the books any longer. At least they're not putting new laws on about cross-dressing. But what it is now is what we all hear in the news, and this is the bathroom bills. So like North Carolina's HB 2 bill. So the core logic is really the same as it was back in 1863. The state is claiming power to define what a man or woman looks like and where we're allowed to be. What is some of the legislation that's coming out now?
There's states like New Hampshire that are continuing to push restroom restrictions based on sex assigned at birth. That's one that just drives me crazy. If you are supposed to use a bathroom that you are the sex assigned at birth, and no one would even recognize that you were once a man but are now a woman, and you walked into the sex you were assigned at birth, people would say, "What are you doing here?"
And in fact, I have had times in my life because I am that type of person that wrestles with these things deeply and has tried to figure out what do I think and you know what, I'm going to stand on my principles. I don't care what it is. I've had a few times where I've said, you know what? I'm going to just follow what these people say and I'm just going to use the men's restroom because that's what they're wanting. I tried that once. And then
Bad
I said,
idea.
forget it. Nobody saw me. It was in a library. I was by myself. Nobody else came in. And I thought, forget it. I am never, ever, ever doing this again. That would not make anybody feel better seeing me in a men's room. They would think I'm in the wrong room.
Well, there's other legislation too, like in Kansas City, bills banning drag performances where minors could see them. These laws define a display of gender identity that differs from assigned sex at birth as inherently obscene. That's the 1863 ordinance in 2026 clothing.
Right. It's just coming back again in another way. You see these again and again. It's just a perpetual cycle here. So, and now the big thing is restricting legal gender recognition. So, for instance, I have not updated my passport. And if I want to go update my passport right now, it is going to say male on there right now because no matter what letters I have, no matter what my state license says, no matter what surgeries I've had, no matter what anything, some people in charge decided because it said M on my birth certificate, I cannot go back. And in fact, I think on my birth certificate, I would be legally allowed in my state to get that change, although I have not done it. But I am legally allowed to change it. But some states you are not. And I know Ohio, I had a friend that his birth certificate was from Ohio, not allowed to change any of his documents from Ohio. Idaho courts have upheld state authority to prevent any gender marker changes. So on a driver's license, then I would have to have an M on my driver's license if it was Ohio, or a trans man would still have to have F as a female. And so if the state controls how your gender is documented, then they really control how your expression is judged. I remember the
Right.
very first time that I got carded before I had my driver's license updated. And I had to show somebody my old driver's license. It was before my picture was done, but also my gender marker still said male. And I was exceptionally embarrassed by it.
Well, these bathroom bills are the same type as they were in 1863, the same core logic. States like New Hampshire continue to push restroom restrictions based on sex assigned at birth. Some states define what a man or a woman looks like and where they're allowed to be in public.
It's terrible. And then when you consider school and youth policies as
Oh,
well,
yeah.
now we have laws barring schools from allowing students to express their gender identity without parental notification. You've got laws controlling gender expression for the youngest, most vulnerable people. The kids that are gender nonconforming are going through it the worst right now.
The direction is toward less recognition, not more. And we had more recognition, but since 2024, efforts to roll back transgender identity recognition in federal documents and healthcare exist. It just continues. So it's all starting to go backwards again. There's less recognition, not more.
So the good news is there is some pushback. So federal judges are still blocking enforcement of some of these anti-drag or anti-trans laws. There's a lot of legal challenges on First Amendment and equal protection grounds, which is good. Civil rights organizations are actively monitoring and opposing some of this stuff. And then the International Human Rights Defense Act of 2025 is seeking to codify LGBTQ plus protections in U.S. diplomacy. So we are seeing some bright spots.
Yes, we certainly are. And that is good news.
Let's look at what's the through line of all of this. What do we care about for the history? What do we need to know in the key points, Dad?
Well, we have to know, first of all, that history says this has been around for many, many, many years. Using laws to get things the way people want them rather than using laws for what is really realistic and what is really correct. People think, you can't do this because I don't agree with it. In reality, that's what they're saying. Also, it's a thing that has really defined the way in which we're moving. And you can see in our country, one of the things that's happening is that some of these things are going backwards. But the good news is it still continues to go forwards.
Right, right. You see this whole thing going from 1863 in San Francisco, the Cooper Donut Raid, the California ruling in 1962, all the way right through that North Carolina bill. It's the same story for the last 163 years. The states are claiming the right, or in this case now the federal government, trying to decide what gender looks like and punishing those of us that don't line up. The language changes, but you see the power dynamic does not. Through it all, there's a group of good-hearted people that are good actors that are really seeking to do what's right.
And the other good news is there are podcasts out there that are seeking to do what is right.
Yes, there sure are. But do you have an idea of one that someone might want to listen to?
Yes, transcendent. And we really encourage you to share this with others. This is a labor of love. I'm so pleased about how the growth has been. We're now in 72 countries. And if you know someone in another country and tell them next week we'll be in 73. And with that, we'll see you Monday.
What's a dentist's favorite time of day?
2:30.
2:30.